So I'm going to be talking about our work on system designs of data intermediaries. So there's a lot of activity going on around, it's a field called data governance, data stewardship, depending on your terminology, and we've heard about it today. Basically, the idea in this field is that we're trying to create new models for collecting, handling, and using data to rebalance the power dynamic back into the favor of the people to whom data belongs in some sense. And the majority of these come from socio-legal communities, so tech law, policy circles, even the arts. And for the last decade or so, anyone who's sort of reviewed this landscape has come away with the same conclusion. We've got plenty of thought experiments, lots of proofs of concept, but just not a great indicative body of practice that we can pick up and build on. And few practical tools that are clearly usable and that you can pick up and compose if you wanted to build your own stewardship system, socio-technical system. So this is the challenge that we try to address in our work. So we want to join the dots between this rich socio-legal discipline and the technical communities. And we want to put some meat on the bones of the practical side of data governance so that the prospective practitioner has more to go on when they want to know, why they should choose a certain approach of, those ones up there, how they should do it, what questions they need to ask, and what tools they're available to them. Whether those are technical, whether it's contractual, or whatever. So a quick spoiler for the paper. What we do is we try to focus on one significant subfield of data governance models, which is intermediaries. That's an umbrella term which covers approaches you may have heard of: data trusts, data commons, cooperatives, collaboratives, personal data stores, marketplaces. And what we did was we surveyed the existing work in all these intermediaries projects, and we systematized them into a single system design problem. And then we provided design language on top of that and a framework to support future practitioners. So, quick introduction to what intermediaries are in general. On one side, you have suppliers. So these might be individuals, communities, public sector organizations, local authorities, basically even private companies. Anyone to whom data might belong in some sense, whether that's personal data rights or some other commercial interest or whatever. On the other side, we have recipients. These are the parties who have an interest in using that data. They might be private companies, they might be governments, they might be collective action groups set up on behalf of the suppliers. And in order to enable the recipient's data use and ensure that it aligns with the rights and interests of those suppliers, we introduce the intermediary. So this is a partly trusted third party which creates and enforces a governance regime over this entire ecosystem. And so it might be an independent body, it might be for-profit, it might be non-profit. So it can take multiple forms. It's a broad umbrella. It accommodates top-down governance approaches where you have a very highly trusted, delegated intermediary which can make decisions, and also participatory approaches, bottom-up ones where the suppliers have an active interest and decision-making role. So there's a good body of existing work out there in intermediaries. It's growing. You may have heard of the data trust, which pulled Uber drivers. Which pulled Uber drivers in the UK's data to sue for their labour rights, and they won the Supreme Court. So what we did was we surveyed this landscape, and we found a wide range of purposes that intermediaries have been introduced to achieve. So this is some of them. Now, imagine you're a practitioner, right? So maybe you represent a community group, maybe you're setting up a research project, maybe you're a government agency trying to collect data from private sector companies for the public good. So myself, as someone who's managed data intermediary and has looked into trying a new approach, I found there just wasn't a good base of knowledge out there that could tell me where I could potentially start in architecting a new system. And in our survey, we found this practice gap to be super apparent. So first off, technical folks just don't have an in to this. So once the responsible data management becomes the topic of conversation, they don't have an in to thinking about governance. They don't have the right guidance or prior art to model their approaches on. And what's out there in responsible data governance is mostly legal and procedural. So for example, the work on trusts mostly focuses on using fiduciary duties as a basis of governance and doesn't really give guidance on what the actual data handling looks like. Not a criticism, but there's a gap there. We understand this gap to be a system design problem. So what we need is a framework for describing what intermediary systems look like in practice and a language that we can use to relate aspects of that design to governance concerns, and identify the right tools to address those concerns. So the first step in any system design problem is to arrive at a specification. Right? So we extracted all the concerns and questions discussed and addressed in the existing work, and we distilled them into these 12 questions. So first off, you have to figure out what the processing task at hand looks like. Then you have to figure out how you're going to divide data and responsibilities between the suppliers and the intermediary. And then you need to figure out what governance strategies you're going to employ over that structural solution. And asking and answering these questions, that's the main task of the potential intermediary practitioner, whether you're setting up a trust, whether you're setting up a collaborative, whatever. So intermediaries are a fundamentally structural approach to governance. So what we did was we came up with a design language that describes the intermediary ecosystem in terms of how you divide work and orchestrate it across this ecosystem. So each party can perform activities in 3 categories. You've got requests made to another party, processing of data you hold, or release of data to another party. Of course, you've got plenty of ways in which you can play this out between parties during a single task. And what we did was we distilled these into archetypal patterns, so which we call architectures. The job of the practitioner is then to choose the architecture that suits their needs the best. Each architecture has its own governance effect itself, and also becomes the platform on which you can deploy other governance tools and strategies. So I'll quickly take you through the 3 top-level architectures. The main distinguishing factor between them is how far they go in centralizing decision-making and processing and technical responsibilities to the intermediary. So first you have the centralized architecture. This ecosystem suppliers send data to the intermediary. It receives the request from the recipient, does some processing, sends it back. So that's basically 3 steps. Each one is a point of contact where you can employ some governance strategy, right? So when the recipient makes contact, you might do some vetting. When it's time to do processing, you might do some code review. When it's time to release it, you might do an audit. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got a conductor intermediary. This is basically a point of contact for the recipient, but serves mostly as a gatekeeper and a coordinator. So it makes some decisions of how to pass the data, the request onto the suppliers, but then the suppliers handle it. They do the processing of the data, they send the results straight to the recipient. They have maximal control and visibility over the task. And then between those extremes, you've got mixed intermediaries. These are basically any ecosystem that divides decision-making and processing between suppliers and intermediaries, and they're both active during the task. So naturally, that can be done in a lot of different ways. You can have a situation where the suppliers do some processing, send it to the intermediary, that aggregates it, does some sanitization, some checks, sends it back to the, etc. So now you've got this wide range of practical arrangements that you can use. Why would you pick one over another? That's the question that you need to figure out. We dig into the detail in the paper, but I'll demonstrate some of those considerations here. So one of the benefits of a centralized architecture, you've got all the data in one place, only one place to protect from a security perspective, but that also means if you get hit harder, which affects all the suppliers. Putting it all in one place lets you do exploratory data science. That's why we have big data, right? But analyzing data across a number of parties is difficult. But putting everyone's data together also increases the risk of discovering patterns and achieving privacy attacks. If you're keeping these suppliers actively involved, then they can exert more visibility, veto data disclosures, etc. And of course, then there's a question of costs. Do you centralize at the intermediary, which might be fairer, or do you spread it across, and that might achieve efficiencies? I won't go into even more considerations, but we have a thorough discussion of this in the paper. And of course, there's a lot of technical work out there that can be used to implement these ecosystems. So we provide a mapping from these architectures to the technical work that's out there. And of course, we're over here in the governance world talking about these concerns, but the technical communities also are thinking about them as well. So the data management community is very alive to the need for responsible data management. There's a lot of technical work that they're doing coming at these problems, but they really need the input of people here, of people with understandings of power dynamics, of legal burdens, etc. So it's really crucial to sort of strike across these streams. So quick run of what's in the paper, convince you to go and have a look at it. We survey and systematize existing projects. We have a design specification questions. We have a design language for intermediaries. We have a thorough discussion of the different considerations when you're choosing your architectures. We actually give you a reference API, which you can use to model any of the parties in the ecosystem, spin up your own example projects, and figure out what these considerations look like in practice. And we draw the links to technical research. So please go and have a look at it, and we look forward to bridging these gaps together. Thank you.